ready when you're ready to pop the little red light. There we go. Welcome, everybody. I, Councilmember Tola Martz, call the July 19th, 2022 City Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee meeting to order. There are going to be multiple opportunities tonight to give public comment. You can give comment both at the beginning of the evening, or we're going to have points on each of the items that are under consideration to take public comment as well. So at this time, members of the public can address the council. If anyone has signed up in advance, they'll get to be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. What that means is if you're on the phone, please press *3. If you are joining us by computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. If you're in the room, I don't think we have any members of the public here in the room. So, Chris, do we have anyone registered to give comment this evening?
Councilmember Martz, we had no members of the public sign up to speak and no members of the public in virtual attendance at the moment.
All right. Well, then, we will go forward. As a reminder, written comments can be submitted at any time to citycouncil@issaquah.gov. So next, we will go to our first item of the evening, which is ID 0724, City Facilities Assessment and Surplus Property Policy.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Councilmember Martz. Approval of the minutes?
I am sorry. And so you are right. It's just I was skipping from the script to where I thought I was supposed to go. Right. Next on our agenda, we have approval of the minutes. We have minutes from June 22nd, 2022, and I believe we have a proposed amendment to those minutes. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. Just to make sure that we are very clear about what the Services, Safety, and Parks Committee decided last time. On the second page of the minutes, on the fifth bullet down, for formula for human services grants, the last bullet says baseline of $500,000 plus population growth / per capita plus CPI. And then I would like to have added there to start in 2023. And I did go back and look at the video, and that is what we agreed upon. And then I also heard City Administrator Bob Quitz say that there would be additional study done on how that would affect us going forward. But at this point, that was what the committee wanted. So if we could just have the phrase "to start in 2023" as a clarification, I would appreciate that addition.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any, would the administration care to comment on this? Nope, no comment. Any discussion?
Nope.
Any public comment, I suppose I should ask?
I do not see any public comment.
All right.
Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. Hearing none, we will move to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. With that, we will move on to...
Just to be clear, the clerk asks, was the motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Sorry, actually, the motion was to amend, so now I must ask, the way I said it was the motion to amend. Thank you, clerk/parliamentarian. The motion before us is to adopt the minutes as amended.
You don't really need a second with 3, but second.
All right. Any comment, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. With that, perhaps, if we are lucky, we'll be able to move to ID 0724, City Facilities Assessments and Surplus Policy, Property Policy with Autumn Monahan.
Can we hear me now? Oh, much better. I'll repeat myself. So thank you, Chair Martz and members of the committee. My name is Autumn Monahan. I'm the Administrative Services Director. We're here for a few reasons tonight. The first is to receive the committee's feedback and direction on our draft surplus property policy. This was previously presented to the full council back in 2021. We received your feedback, have made some tweaks, and are here tonight to receive further feedback on that policy. It's good time to look at this draft policy again because we have a few facilities projects coming up that this would really help with. The first is that we've gone out for an RFP to help us in assessing what's next for our city hall space planning. So that project is going to be underway this year with hopefully some more information for council and recommendations next year. Also, we hope to do a building assessment and an audit on all of our properties in the coming year. And so as we work on these important projects, it's important that we have a surplus policy in place so that that can help guide any future discussions we have around any properties that we may no longer need. So we'll also take this opportunity tonight just to provide an update to the committee on how we're using our current space because a lot has changed during the pandemic. So it's time to quickly update you on how we're using our current space. So with that, I'd first like to introduce Gene Paul. He's our management analyst who developed the draft policy to start with and is here to share some of the updates that he's made following council feedback. Thanks.
Good evening, council members. My name is Gene Paul. I'm a management analyst in the executive office, and my portion of tonight's presentation will focus on the draft policy for surplus real property. As background, the city has acquired numerous properties over the last 40 years. The Facilities Division compiled an inventory of information on 18 specific properties that were not being directly used by the city in 2019. This inventory was updated and provided to the City Council in October of 2020. To help create a framework for how to decide what to do with potential properties that could be surplus to the city's needs, the administration drafted a policy and presented it at a study session in April 2021. Since it's been such a long time since this item was before the City Council, I'll be summarizing both the policy itself and the changes the administration has made based on the feedback at the City Council's study session. In terms of existing policies, the city's adopted financial management policy has a small section that addresses surplus property. Essentially, any real property will be surplused by a City Council resolution, but it does not describe the process in any more detail. To create a more specific and robust process, the administration researched cities that have policies to identify their best practices. We found 8 cities that have a relevant version of such a policy. We also found a broad spectrum of both level of detail in those policies and the legislative vehicle for approving it. The administration did identify common elements from this research, and from those common elements, we drafted our proposal. Here's an overview. The process would be initiated at either the administration's or the City Council's request. The next step after initiation is the administration's review. During this phase, the details of a property are inventoried and then used by staff to gain an understanding of the property. During this process, staff would use the draft evaluation criteria that I'll go into more detail about on a later slide. After evaluating the property with the standardized criteria, staff would generate a recommendation for the City Council. The next phase is a City Council review. This would consist of a public hearing, if necessary, and the council determination of what to do with the property. If the council decided that a property was surplus, that would be captured in a resolution. Again, I'll provide more detail on this phase in later slides, but wanted to provide a general overview here. In terms of the administration's approach to this policy, the desire was to keep it at a high level and flexible. Our recommendation is to have a standard operating procedures for the administration review phase, and the policy approved by the council would summarize that phase, but further delineate the City Council phase of work. This method would not require City Council action for staff to update administrative procedures, but would still provide the framework for a formal policy. The evaluation criteria for the administration's review were developed by reviewing the processes performed by other cities and compiling their best practices. Overall, there are 5 groups of questions that help staff understand the property being reviewed and arrive at a final recommendation. The packet contains the detailed version of the draft criteria, but I'll summarize those 5 groups of questions here. The first question asks whether the intended public use of the property at the time of acquisition is still relevant to the city's priorities and adopted plans. The second group of questions address the property's current use, whether that aligns with the intended use at acquisition, and how that use may or may not connect to adjacent properties. The third group of questions address the current condition of the property and the cost to maintain it. The fourth area incorporates the council feedback from the 2021 study session and analyzes the public benefits by looking at both monetary and non-monetary benefits. This includes examining balancing costs, revenues, and potential tax value, as well as examining who benefits when using an equity lens. Finally, the fifth set of questions determines if there are other uses for the property or restrictions upon use that could impact how the administration may arrive at a recommendation. This set of questions was also updated to include the administration evaluating whether structures or landmarks on the property should be considered for historic preservation. Ultimately, the administration would use these 5 criteria to recommend one of 3 options to the City Council: retain the property and continue with current use, retain and transition to a new public use, or consider the property for surplus. Any property recommended for surplus would come to the City
I'm
Council.
sorry, I have a question before you move on.
Sure.
You mentioned, but it doesn't show on the slide, you mentioned historical significance.
Yes.
So can you, I'm just, because I don't see it on there, what can you, will any property that's being considered for surplus be evaluated for historical significance?
Yes.
Okay.
It's in the more detailed draft criteria, but
Okay.
that last bullet point of kind of other uses for the property would be where the administration would consider that kind of historic preservation component.
Okay, thank you.
So any property recommended for surplus would come to the City Council for review and final decision. The first step in the proposed process is to conduct a public hearing. There are 2 situations where a public hearing is required by state law. Those 2 are the intergovernmental transfer of property valued at more than $50,000 and the sale of property originally acquired by a public utility. For situations other than those, public hearings are not currently required. However, the administration is recommending that public hearings be held for any property with an assessed value greater than $50,000. The administration is also recommending that public notice be provided in the following ways: published in the newspaper of record, provided to all property owners within 500 feet or to 20 property owners, whichever is greater, and in situations where there are known tenants, such as multifamily residencies, the city will notify tenants. Finally, the city will advertise on the website and other channels such as social media. These criteria address the council's feedback from 2021 by including tenants in the notification process and also adding the city's website and other communication channels to the requirements. Overall, these notice parameters land in between the current version of Title 18 and what some other cities have instituted with their policies. The recommendations are based on what the Community Planning and Development Department is proposing for the Title 18 updates, and they also balance the staffing time and cost considerations with the need for public notification. Based on the information from the administration and the public hearing, the process concludes with the City Council making a series of decisions around whether to declare a property to be surplus, to retain or dispose of it, and if disposed, how to carry that out. If the council decided that a property is surplus to the city needs, that process ultimately concludes with approving a resolution. Overall, there are a number of options for the council committee when it comes to this policy this evening. Those include deciding not to move forward with a more formal policy, proposing alternative criteria for evaluation or public hearings, or including more details in other aspects of the policy. In terms of timing and next steps for this policy, the administration will incorporate your feedback tonight and recommends bringing this item to the September 6th City Council meeting for adoption. The administration would be presenting an ordinance that would not only adopt the policy, but also place the public hearing requirements into the municipal code. Placing the public hearing requirements into the municipal code maintains consistency with other policy areas like land use or right-of-way vacation that have their own hearing requirements codified. After potential council action in September, the administration intends to evaluate the long-term needs for city facilities next year, and based on that planning, applying this surplus property could occur in 2023. Director Monahan will be providing more detail on the facilities planning during her portion of the presentation. This is the final slide from my portion of the presentation. It reiterates that we're seeking your direction this evening on whether to proceed with adopting the surplus real property policy. I believe this slide is also at the end of the Director Monahan's portion. So before I turn it over, I just wanted to pause and see if there's any questions for this portion of the presentation.
Yes. Oh, Chris, do you have one?
I have a couple.
Good.
Can I
Go for it.
All right. Thanks, Gene. Great presentation as always. On the public notice part, it tells us kind of who, but it doesn't tell us when. So is there a time frame about when we would make the notification, or are there some existing standards of when notifications are made?
Yes, it's in the policy, and I think off the top of my head, it's something like 25 days prior to the public hearing is the earliest, and no later than 10 days prior.
Okay, and so that's documented elsewhere in the code?
Correct.
Okay, and so the biggest difference really between the existing process and this one is we're really formalizing the public hearing and putting a little more structure around evaluation criteria?
Correct.
Great, that's what I thought.
Councilmember DeMichelle, do you have any questions at this point? I have a question about, so this is the policy if the administration brings forward a candidate property for surplusing, right?
Correct.
There's 18 properties that do not serve what I don't remember the term, core business, city business function. Is that how you put it? Or there's 18 properties total that the city has.
Those were the ones that were initially inventoried.
Right.
They're obviously, that was not the only inventory of city properties. It was just kind of the facilities division had a specific idea at that time that those were likely candidates to consider.
What would be the process if the council wanted to consider surplusing a property? So if the origin of the surplusing didn't come from the administration, but came from the council?
It would be the same process, and I see the city administrator looking to weigh in, but it could originate, according to this policy now, from either the city council or the administration.
And the city council portion would be initiated as you would any other new item per the policy that the council adopted last year.
All right, thank you. Move on to Autumn's portion.
All right, so we wanted to give you a quick update on how our city facilities are being used right now. There's been a lot of changes during COVID. So time to just take a little tour around some of our city facilities and how they're being used. So to start, City Hall Northwest is now vacated, a massive, massive undertaking by our staff to clean out a very large building. What exists, or what's left now of City Hall Northwest is furniture, as well as we do have a few staff that are over there helping with digitizing records. So you'll see a picture here in a moment. Also a massive undertaking, and boxes of paper records that need digitizing, they need organization and disposal. So that work continues through the end of this year, the records work at City Hall Northwest. Meanwhile, where did all the staff go? So a lot of them are working in a hybrid environment and then also utilizing hoteling stations or desks throughout the city. So here's just a few examples of what City Hall Northwest looks like now. Again, it's a whole lot of paper and some empty furniture. Again, a huge undertaking by our IT team, our facilities team, and others to help us clear out that building and really get us set up for what's next. So our permit center, which was located over at City Hall Northwest, moved to City Hall, and it's in the Eagle Room downstairs. So this is a very creative use of that space that used to be used for community meetings and for a lot of training for our police officers, and now has been transitioned into a permit center. This is also the main counter for City Hall, and so you can come here too and also request to pay your utility bill or just receive service in general. So this is kind of our main counter now for City Hall. Meanwhile, staff have the option to reserve desk space or hotel space at City Hall on the second floor. And many departments are utilizing that. That includes human resources, economic development, community planning and development, administrative services. And as you'll see here on this picture, there's a map here that identifies all the different cubicles that you can reserve, and we've got that easily reservable via Outlook or through an outline form. So that's how staff are organizing their time and their space. Our community planning and development inspectors have moved from City Hall Northwest to Tibbetts. You may have noticed that transition during the council retreat that was held this past weekend. But as you enter Tibbetts, to the left now is all occupied by our CPD inspectors. Human Services has moved to Doherty B, so that is the half of the yellow building that's next door to us now, and that's now their new office space. Meanwhile, our IT team is located in several areas. One is above us at City Hall South, and the other is over at Public Works in that main shop, in the main building there. Engineering, some engineers are utilizing City Hall upstairs on the second floor. Some are also utilizing other hotel desks that we have set up at the Public Works shop. And as you'll see, we also have some temporary mobile unit out for some of our inspectors as well, just to accommodate some more space. The plan long-term for Public Works is a minor remodel of that building to accommodate all of the engineers who are coming over to make Public Works, both engineering and operations, now operating out of one building. So we're looking to create a few new offices in that project, provide some lockers for specifically engineering and other hoteling staff, which we did over at City Hall and has been a good success, just so they can store a few personal items or some equipment. We're looking to have some new furniture to accommodate having more staff at that shop, as well as some storage solutions for equipment that engineers use. And we're just finalizing the plans on that work now, and hopefully we'll be done and implementing early in 2023. And here's just a quick layout of the top floor of the Public Works shop, and you can see areas where we'll be adding more lockers here, and then some more office space for some managers, as well as making this space a bit more accommodating for hoteling and shared space. So that's a quick update on where everyone has gone to vacate City Hall Northwest. We've been using really creative options as far as hoteling and telecommuting, but we need a more permanent home. So what's next around that? So we issued an RFP, and we're just in that process now of starting to interview some interested firms to help us with just overall project management. The idea is that we first need to do a needs assessment. What is it that we're looking for? What are our hopes and dreams for what City Hall should be in the future? What do we need as far as space now that we've changed our policies around a lot of our employees being able to work from home several days a week? So first off, what do we need? What are our goals? So I'd like to start there. And then doing a feasibility and a financial analysis. So my goal is that by the end of the first quarter of 2023, we come back to the full council and provide you a menu of options that include estimates on cost, ideas around funding, but also some options on what do we do with some of our facilities. Where do we go? Are we looking to build something new? Are we looking to lease? What's our long-term plan? So anyway, I hope to come back to council, this committee, at the end of this year to provide you an update and to introduce you to who we select for a project manager around that initiative. And then the idea is, again, that we would come back to council the first quarter of 2023 with a feasibility and financial analysis to help us make a decision on what road or what path to take. In addition to City Hall, as you had mentioned earlier, Chair Martz, we have a whole lot of other properties as a city. And it's time to really identify all of those buildings, all of those properties, look at what the deficiencies are of those buildings, assess what those long-term costs will be, create a more proactive maintenance plan around our facilities, and then really determine long-term steps and plans for a lot of those facilities, which Jean did a great job of teeing up this policy. They help us dispose of some if we choose to in the long run. But as a starting point, we're looking to just better understand what we have now to really help in developing a long-term facilities master plan.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you back up one slide just for a second?
Sure.
You've got our August Services and Safety and Parks meeting listed there. I didn't think we had an August meeting. Isn't it the week that?
Apologies. So August was when I hope to have our consultants selected.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Yeah, and that will.
That isn't a Service and Safety and Parks.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
So, yeah, so I hope to have the consultant selected by then, really finalize the scope, and then are excited to bring the consultant back to present to this committee
Yes, I heard that
later in
part,
the year.
and I saw August,
Yeah.
and I got excited, so.
All right. So that's the end of
I'm sorry,
the,
Barb has Councilmember DiMichele has a question?
Thanks. So this weekend I drove to Spokane and back, and I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts. And there was a really interesting discussion about the fact that the ability to work at home is now listed as like one of the top criteria for employees who are looking for new jobs or thinking about whether or not to stay with the job. So I'm just wondering if we are doing any kind of analysis, or we plan to do any kind of analysis in terms of our employee satisfaction with hoteling and things like that, and then how that might shape some of our future plans.
sure. Anecdotally, I know that it's a really powerful and great recruitment tool right now, as far as our policy around at least some of our staff. A significant amount must be in person for work, but for those who can, and those positions we're recruiting for, it definitely is helping. But yes, this is part of the assessment as far as what we need, is definitely engaging with our staff and seeing how it's going now that we're really trying some creative options around working from home, and kind of long-term what that policy is going to be, right? So that engagement with the employees is definitely part of this project management project. Yeah.
I don't think we have any other questions at this moment.
Great. That's the end of my presentation. I did want to loop back with the only direction we're looking for tonight. We were just taking the opportunity to provide some updates on what we're working on broadly in facilities. But specifically, we're looking for direction from the committee around adopting the draft surplus real property policy.
Well, thank you, and this is the point where I had mentioned there were 2 opportunities for the public to speak. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Ray.
I was just saving my questions for the end, and I didn't realize we were so close to the end. Couple of questions, probably better for HR, but you're here, so I'm going to ask you anyway. What percentage of our employees are working in a hybrid model now, roughly?
Gosh, I would say, I'm going to throw out a number, but probably a
I
little
won't
less
hold
than
you
half,
to it.
probably 40, 50%.
Well, Councilmember Ray, members of the committee, when you have to look at how many of our employees can't do that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you subtract out police, public works, park maintenance, it's a 30 to 40% number that have the ability to work hybrid. And of that 30 to 40%, I would say 97% of that group take advantage of the policy. And currently the policy is that individuals must, if you are office-based, you have to be here 1 day a week.
Well, that was my
and
next
so-
question. So that's great. I was just kind of curious what the on-site requirement was. Do we anticipate any changes to the working model? I mean, or does this look like the long-term where we're going?
Yes.
Okay. Great. And then a couple questions about your consultant that you're bringing on. How long do you envision that the PM consulting engagement will last?
Yes, so I hope to have them hired in August, and that we would have the report to you, or the first phase of this project, done by Q1 of next year. And then, depending on who we select as a consultant, they may help us in actual implementation once we decide a path for what's next for City Hall space planning, or we may go back out to RFP to find someone else to help us with that second phase.
Okay, and you may have just answered my next question, which is, so at the end of the engagement, the major deliverable would be ...
After the engagement, then it's the analysis, and my end goal is that we provide council a menu of options, where you see the costs, you see funding strategies, you see options for ownership or leasing, what we do with City Hall Northwest, providing some of those options that then we can really start to have some tangible discussions around which path to take.
Great. Thanks, Autumn.
Any other questions before we move to public comment? So as I was saying before, this is a second opportunity for public comment. Specific to this item, we do now have members of the public with us. So I will first ask if any members of the public wish to speak to this issue. No. Do we, Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone, Chris, do we have anybody on the line wishes to comment on this issue?
Chair Martz, I see no virtual hands raised to speak on this topic.
All right, so then we will move into deliberation.
I'll go first. I think it's, in terms of where we're going with the process around surplusing city property, I think it makes sense. I like seeing the structure around it. I think having well-defined criteria makes everyone's life easier. I think better to have public engagement than not, so a public hearing is great. I have nothing but positive thoughts right now.
Councilmember DiMichele.
I agree. I wanted to commend the staff for excellent work, and I really appreciated the updates, the list of updates, that it only applies to real property, because when I was reading through, I wanted to make sure that that was the case. The fact that you've added the website and communications to the notification, the fact that that it includes tenants in the public notification process if it's applicable. I think that's an excellent addition. The equity lens and the look at the historic nature of the property are all really great additions. I read through the policy itself. It looks really, really well done. So I am in agreement with Councilmember Ray. I have nothing but happy thoughts about this, and I do think it should go forward to the whole council for approval in September. Thank you.
So the the most cogent thought that I have on this is sort of some advice to the administration on timing, which is this is a subject that has come up a number of times. I feel deja vu all over again on this subject. And I think part of it is that we have found in the past when there has been a change in either mayor or city administrator, the subject goes, the reset button gets hit on this. And so one can assume that we will have the same mayor and city administrator for the next 3 years. So I would love to see, or at least, yeah, three and a half. So I would love to see this issue to get at least a cycle through this in the next 3.5 years, and not potentially reset this again and start all over again, because this is really the third or the fourth go round of this in the 13 years I've been doing this. So that's my thought. So I think we're ready to take a vote. So all in favor of the ID as written, recommending it back to the full council for approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
Consent?
Is the administration feeling that consent would be the appropriate place for this?
Yes.
All right, consent it is. We will see if our fellow council members could trust the subcommittee process. Let us hope they do. Thank you. Thank you, Autumn.
Thank you.
Next up, as I go to my notes, we have, don't tell me, this is when I put my glasses on, ID 1126, Religious and Cultural Calendar, with Monica Negrilla, our Human Services Manager. Hi, Monica.
Good evening, Chair Martz and council members. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. Give me just a moment to share my screen here. Oh, I hope I'm sharing the right one. There we are. So good evening again. This is Monica Negrilla, Human Services Manager here at the city. And I also have the pleasure to be joined tonight by a couple of Equity Board members. And I would love to take a moment to introduce them to you and invite them to say a few opening remarks, if that's okay.
Please do.
Thank you so much. So I'm joined by Kelly Munn, one of our Equity Board members, and also by Megan Richley. I want to pause and say a big congratulations to Megan in particular. She's one of our youth representatives who just graduated from high school this year, and she's heading to a Central Arizona University on a full scholarship for softball. So congratulations. We are certainly gonna miss her, but we so appreciated your participation on the Equity Board. And of course, Kelly will stay with us, so I'm gonna invite them. Please say a few words. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's so awesome to meet you guys. I have just been so fortunate to work with this group of amazing people on the work we have done. We have really focused on, taking the first step forward and really, we're not focused on being perfect. We're looking to pilot something to get the conversation started. And this calendar that we worked on, I feel like is the perfect first step. We're really exposing our community to different perspectives, new cultures, different religions. So I'm really excited for you to hear what we have worked on these past couple months.
Hi, I'm Kelly Munn, and I am an unusual member of the Equity Committee, given that the Equity Committee is about, at least half of it is raising the voices of those who are underserved in the community. And I'm a white old woman, so I'm doing pretty well. But the other role of the committee is to help develop policy for the council to adopt that will help this organization and this community be more equitable. And I am very good at helping white people understand those policies. So that is why I joined the Equity Committee. And I'm going to just do a little shout out here. I've been doing equity work for about 12 years. It has been really quite the journey. It is an exciting process and a really difficult process. I have never worked with a team and a leader, this Monica, who can walk that line of talking and doing. We get a lot done. I have never moved this fast, and it is incredible to be able to be a part of it, this team.
Thank you both for your comments. Point of privilege, Councilmember DiMichele.
Yes, I just want to point out that Megan's dad is Chris Freitley. Am I correct? Yes, and Chris is also a member of Kiwanis and a member of the Economic Vitality Commission as well. And so it's really nice to see you, Megan, and finally get to see you in person. But I've heard a lot about your softball career. So thank you. Thanks for the moment.
Sounds a nice family tradition of civic engagement. As a parent of a youth advisory board member, or a former youth advisory board member, I'm a big supporter of family continued engagement in the community. Monica, back to you.
Thank you again, Councilmember Martz and council members, and of course Kelly and Megan. And allow me another moment. I'm having some technical difficulties, which I remember having them as well last month. So I'm gonna try to do better. Give me just a moment. Thank you, Chris. I think this should work. Oh, wow. Okay, I think I'm all set. Thank you so much for your patience. So we are returning to you tonight with, as you know by now, the cultural and religious calendar. And we are seeking your direction on a possible pilot policy that we would like to implement that would acknowledge and consider the religious and cultural holidays when scheduling public meetings. So specifically, what we are looking to hear from you tonight is whether or not you support our recommendation to return to you to a regular city council meeting with a proposed resolution to adopt the policy. The policy would basically state that we as a city would make every effort to avoid scheduling public meetings, particularly city council meetings and boards and commission meetings, on religious holidays that have significant work restrictions that are highlighted in the calendar proposed by the Equity Board. So with that, I'm just going to provide a brief refresher on the background on how this task was launched. So back earlier in the year, back in January, the Equity Board, as it was freshly formed, was tasked by the administration with creating a list of cultural and religious holidays that the city should take into consideration when scheduling public meetings. After working on this for a couple of months, in February, the Equity Board proposed a list of such holidays for the mayor and city council to consider. Following that meeting in March, we had a first overview and presentation at the City Council study session, where we also saw the City Council's input. At that time, we proposed a recommendation later in the year. So here we are now, as we transitioned to committee meetings, here we are now again bringing this item to you. And we are actually recommending as a possibility implementation to start later this year, perhaps even in September, although January is also an option. Again, just a brief refresher on why the Equity Board and the city staff, we thought that it's important to acknowledge holidays. First and foremost, really, it shows our city's commitment to respect diversity and to inclusion. So it is really a way for us to formalize that commitment. Next, we all know that sometimes public meetings coincide with really important religious holidays that certain community groups have. And if you think that can limit their participation in the public process. And last but not least, as a city, we acknowledge and respect and observe federal holidays, which have just a Christian lens, if you wish. They do not recognize other religious holidays, and therefore, again, as a city that recognizes and welcomes and wants to be inclusive, I think it is just such a great idea to have additional lenses. So that being said, the work of the Equity Board really initially, when we came to the Equity Board and proposed the idea, of course, the Equity Board was very excited about the project. And, you know, they came up, and if I remember correctly, actually, there were the board members in attendance tonight who came up with the idea and said, you know, instead of being restrictive and just focusing on a few holidays, what if we create actually a longer and bigger list of holidays that perhaps we cannot take into consideration the hundreds of cultural holidays and religious holidays that exist, but we can use this as an opportunity to educate staff, to educate the community, and just to invite people to reflect and further educate themselves. So that's how we kind of came up with like 3 sections in our larger and more comprehensive calendar. The first set of holidays are really those that we would focus on a policy that we would bring back to you. And those are a list of approximately 15 holidays currently. And those are holidays that are really certain religious dates that have work restrictions or may have some really significant importance in a culture, or sometimes it may include fasting or some just other, they're just most somber holidays, if you wish. And then a next set of holidays is a broader list. And those are holidays that really provide opportunities for our staff and for our community to learn, increase their cultural competency, and really promote diversity. And these are about 80 holidays currently. And of course, with additional community input, we may increase those. For this set of holidays, really, we hope that internally, the staff will take opportunities during meetings, during staff meetings, during community meetings to just acknowledge those holidays and really educate themselves and others. And last but not least, we also included the federal observed holidays, and this is just as a awareness and comparison, if you wish. So what we propose to do and we hope to do with implementing the calendar is first and foremost, we would like to post the calendar for the public to have a chance to weigh in, for the public to come to us and say, hey, I'm part of this culture and I don't see our holiday there. Can we add different holidays? Or perhaps the community can also say, oh, I'm so glad that my culture is represented there. Can we have further conversation? How can we be involved in what the city is doing? Next, we would love to work with our city clerks in adjusting, when needed, the public calendars and try to postpone certain meetings, adjust times, adjust days. And last but not least, as mentioned, we would like to take this opportunity to educate our staff, to include it in our ongoing cultural competency trainings. So with that, the options that we are proposing for you tonight are, one, to return to the larger city council meeting with a proposed resolution. Next, we can also just consider piloting the project without adopting a policy first. Or we are open to hearing from you should you have a different direction for us. Our recommendation is to return with a resolution at a meeting in September, a regular council meeting in September, and propose a policy that would state that we, again, as a city, would make every effort to avoid scheduling city council meetings, commissions, board meetings on religious holidays with significant work restrictions that are highlighted in the cultural calendar. And so in terms of next step, we would love to hear your feedback tonight, make any adjustments that you may recommend, and return to you in September with a resolution. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions, and you have on the screen the direction.
So first questions, yes, Councilmember DiMichele.
So when the commissioner, the board was discussing the implementation, was there any discussion of whether it would be better to go with the pilot first and see how it works, or to go with the policy first? Was there, maybe Megan and Kelly could talk a little bit about the discussion around that? So, because it sounds like it's really kind of, you could go two different directions, and one or the other might be absolutely the best, but I'm just wondering what the equity board had to say about that in terms of direction.
Yes, and I would like to invite them up for sure. But however, I would like to clarify something on my end, that I think regardless, even if we go with a policy first, it's still, we are going to pilot it for at least a year, and then we will come back to change the resolution if needed. I think it's the first option with the resolution would just give us a more formal, and I think it would be just a more formal commitment the city is doing, right? But yes, I can speak, and I know the board definitely wanted to pilot this project for sure.
Oh, okay. In other words, we would still be learning as even if we adopted a policy straight out, we'd still be learning as it was first implemented. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And if you like to say something else.
Well, this also spoke to my point a little earlier. This list is not going to be perfect. I mean, we're going to continue to keep researching different things are going to keep popping up, and I think it's never going to be perfect, but I think this is a great space to really collaborate on this and really start exposing ourselves to different perspectives. So I think this is a great first start.
There was some concern on the board about whether it should be public, right, and accessible to other organizations. And in that discussion, it became clear that we were very interested in being able to share it. And I was at a mayor's luncheon, and our mayor talked about it, and most of the other mayors wanted it, right? And the AAA person, the new AAA in Issaquah, was sitting at my table and gave me her card and said, send it to me when you get it. So it creates a lot of goodwill in the community.
Your mic wasn't on, but you said thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, clerk, do we have any indication that anyone's present online and wanting to speak to this?
Chair Martz, I see no virtual hands raised to speak on this item.
All right. And we don't have anyone else in the room with us, so I think we can go straight to deliberation. Councilmember Ray, you look chomping at the bit.
I was leaning in. First off, I always like doing stuff and evolving stuff and not letting perfection be the enemy of progress. And so I applaud you for that. I think this is something you could chew on forever and we'd go nowhere. So hooray for this. I think this is a great list. Really appreciated the idea of a very broad list of holidays that's very inclusive, and then targeting those 15 that have significance around emotional impact or culture or work or fasting, where it really would be a burden for someone to try to participate in public life at that time. So what a great way to acknowledge the larger universe and focus on those where we were creating a barrier for people to engage. So I think that's awesome. I think as a city, for us to look for ways to acknowledge all of these holidays, like Monica mentioned, was great. And also, if there's ways we can engage the community, both the particular cultural parts of the community that are celebrating these holidays, participate with them, or bring it to other parts of the community, I think it just opens people's eyes. So I'm excited about that. And then I think you talked about it. We're going to get public input, and this is going to evolve, and you're going to come back, and we're going to say we need to add these 4 more things on there, and I think that's anyway. So go for it. You know what you're doing is you know, we can call it a pilot or not, but I think whatever it is, we go, we do it, we evolve it, and it's going to get better and better. So thank you very much for all this.
Thank you.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Yeah, I, of course, totally agree with Councilmember Ray, and I am so proud of our Equity Board. Thank you guys so much for just the wonderful, thoughtful discussions and raising issues that we might not have thought about, and I just can't commend you enough. I think I would be, after listening to Monica's explanation of what would happen, I would go with adopting a policy and moving forward with that, and then getting an interim report back. I think that would be a great way to go. I think adopting the policy says to the community the council supports this. Yes. And so that would be my preference then, to go with that. And just great work, you guys. So I'm all in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I as well, the thought that comes to mind is this also is potentially a scaffold off of which could hang some cultural events or artistic events. I remember when a couple of years ago up in the Highlands, they had a Persian art implementation, and that's the kind of thing that having a calendar like this would allow organizations to build off and maybe choose some dates that would be particularly meaningful to those communities, and also allow the rest of us to better understand those cultures. So I'm all in favor, and let's get this policy in place, and there you go. So the motion is to pursue the administration's recommendation, return to a city council regular meeting with a resolution establishing a policy to make every effort to avoid scheduling city council, boards, and commission meetings on religious holidays with significant work restrictions highlighted in the cultural and religious calendar. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you so much.
And
Councilmembers.
Chris?
I was just going to ask my consent question.
All right, there we go. Consent? Consent. Let's put it on consent. And then, last but not least of for this evening, ID 1162, this is coming back, tenant and landlord protection options, also with Monica Negrilla. And thank you again to our Equity Board members who are here this evening. Thank you. And good luck at Central Arizona.
Allow me just a moment, council members, again, to share my screen. And while I do that, I wanted to mention that tonight Of course, online, we have some other staff members, but as always, we have our director, Jeff Watling. And also for this agenda item, tonight with me is our legal counsel, so Rachel Turpin. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And with that, I will start now my presentation. And there we go. So this agenda item, we are returning to you from last month with updates on tenant and landlord protection options based on the feedback that we received from you back in June. So for tonight, we are seeking direction on whether we should continue to monitor potential actions taken by other cities and jurisdictions, while also looking for other advocacy efforts regionally, statewide, and potentially even considering adding this item to the city's 2022-2023 legislative agenda, state legislative agenda, or if you would like to direct us to consider something else or a different approach, we would definitely love to hear that. As a brief refresher and background again, back in April, a regional coalition for housing, ARCH, sent a letter to mayors and council members from the ARCH jurisdictions asking and making recommendations for the cities to consider a consistent set of tenant protections focused on addressing rent increases estimated for this year. Specifically, ARCH was recommending three sets of recommendations. Number one, longer notices for rent increases. In particular, the recommendation that ARCH mentioned includes providing a 120-day notice for any rent increases that are over 3%, and a 180-day notice for any rent increases that are greater than 10%. Number two, ARCH was also recommending a cap for late fees. In particular, 1.5% of the, capping late fees at no more than 1.5% of a tenant's monthly rent. And also third, a cap for move-in fees, in particular, any deposits that people need to pay for moving costs. And those, the recommendation from ARCH came that those should be capped at no more than a person's 1 month rent, and also the recommendation was to allow tenants to pay in installments. So following that letter, our staff conducted some outreach to landlords and tenants in our city. We conducted interviews and surveyed both landlords and tenants. And what you see on the screen is really a summary excuse me, a summary of the feedback that we heard. From landlords, the main concerns that we heard were that landlords have additional properties in many of them have additional properties in other jurisdictions, and therefore they were seeking consistent regional policies if some were taken. And also we heard from landlords across our city that they have been also affected by rising costs and operational costs for their work as well. On the tenant side, the heartbreaking news that we heard is that really the financial rental assistance need for tenants goes beyond any one-time funding or occasional funding needs. And tenants need long-term options instead of small policies. And really the key findings from both tenants and landlords were really to remain consistent with other jurisdictions if we decide to do something, and really focus on addressing long-term needs. And so with that, at the June 22nd Services, Safety, and Parks Committee meeting, the input that we received from you was really to look for those regional options and not acting as a singular entity in silo. You were interested in hearing further updates from other jurisdictions. There was a possible interest in perhaps looking at extending just rent notices to perhaps 90 days. But again, only if that was consistent with other jurisdictions. And last but not least, there was an interest to really learn from our legal counsel regarding legal aspects, including risks and potential enforcement options that such policy will consider. So with that, I'm gonna go over some of the updates that we had from other jurisdictions, and then I'm gonna invite Rachel for a brief presentation on her end and opportunities to have questions and answers. I want to make a note that at the time when we prepared this presentation, that was about a week ago, some things have been updated since then because some cities considered, they have, like, for example, the city of Redmond is meeting actually right now, and they are considering an option, but a week ago we didn't have that information. So what you have in your packet on the screen is really a table with some of the ARCH jurisdictions and what they have done so far and what are their proposed next steps. Really similar with what we had and updates that we had in June. As of today, there's no ARCH jurisdiction other than Kenmore who took action earlier on, but there's no other ARCH jurisdiction who took action on any of these recommendations. Again, the city of Redmond is considering them tonight, and we will find out in the next day or tonight what that is. The city of Kirkland has an upcoming meeting scheduled for August 3rd for a potential action, but it's unclear at this point if there's going to be action or just an update at that time. The city of Newcastle also had a first presentation on June 21st. They were hoping to bring this item back in July. We don't have yet a date, or at least we didn't have a few days ago. And
Monica, before you move on, it says here that Bellevue did a first council conversation last night.
yes, thank you. So the city of Bellevue was scheduled to have a meeting last night on this item. However, I did not receive updates. I tried to circle back and I could not find the agenda item on their last night's calendar. So so I'm not sure if it was pulled off or it was, but I have sent out emails for follow-up. I just did not hear back yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. We talked about Redmond, and Sammamish did not discuss this yet and has no specific plans currently. In your agenda packet, you also have, it's not on the screen, but you have a comparison table with jurisdictions that already took actions, and that includes unincorporated King County. Also, there are a few specific items from the state legislation and a few ideas that were discussed at some of the jurisdictions that are some of the ARCH jurisdictions. None of those are decisions. They are just like brainstorming options that were brought up. Of highlight really like 120 days or some similar options with unincorporated King County. Or for example, the city of Kirkland is considering that perhaps if they take action, maybe there should also be a sunsetting date. So again, there are many conversations, but nothing clear and set in stone as of tonight. And with that, I just talked about that. With that, I will invite Rachel to answer any questions that you might have. And again, based on information from June, she would focus on any information under the state law, risks, and enforcement. Rachel, welcome. Good evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here this evening. Rachel Turpin, City Attorney. I do have some thoughts on this legislation. And some insights into the potential risks and kind of the potential issues that the city could face if you were to adopt legislation like this. I will say first off that I think it's really noble legislation. It has nothing to do with that, but there, as with any legislation, and I think in the short time that you've known me, you probably have gathered that I do like writing laws. So it would be my pleasure to write something for you to put on the books. However, I do think in this case that it may not be necessarily worth your while at this moment. And here's why. Well, first of all, potential liability. When I talk about potential liability, I want to be clear that when I say potential liability, I don't think that litigation in opposition to this legislation would ultimately be successful for the reasons that I will go over as I discuss this with you here this evening. However, as we all know here in this room and virtually, that doesn't mean that litigation isn't just a huge time and resource suck anyway. And there are several avenues under which I can foresee challenges, even if ultimately they probably wouldn't prevail. One of those would be, the most likely would be a preemption argument. The other would be related to the city's enforcement of the ordinance itself, perhaps an argument that the city was selectively enforcing the ordinance, somehow discriminatorily enforcing the ordinance. There would also just be a lot of issues related to the cost and the difficulties of enforcing the ordinance, which I will get to momentarily. But first, let's talk about preemption, because I think that's probably the most likely lines of a legal challenge if the city were to enact this legislation. So a state statute, there's two ways that you can be preempted by state law. There's state statute preemption, which occurs when the state occupies the entire, there's field preemption, which occurs when the state occupies an entire field of something. And then there's statute preemption, which occurs when a state statute and a city ordinance are irreconcilably in conflict with one another. So field preemption only happens when the state legislature has expressed an intent to occupy the entire field, or when such intent is like very, very obviously implied. The biggest time the most common time that we see this in the municipal field is with firearms. The state law has very, very expressly stated that the legislature intends that the state occupy the entire field of firearm regulation. And so that's why we're so limited with what we can do and with regard to that. The state has not field occupied landlord-tenant law. There's been a number of cases about that, and there's no field occupation. So that's not something we have to worry about here. So the issue really is only whether or not there's any sort of statute conflict preemption. So once again, that occurs where the language in a statute is irreconcilably in conflict with an ordinance that the city passes, which basically happens when state law forbids something, when your ordinance either permits something that state law forbids or forbids something that state law expressly permits. But in general, due to the constitutional provision that, that the city basically can make and enforce any laws within its limits, for the local police, sanitary, and other regulations that aren't in conflict with the general laws, you can really do what you want. So you have pretty broad regulatory powers, essentially, under the Constitution. There are a few, though, that you
Rachel,
really can't
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. We have a question from Councilmember DiMichele.
So Rachel, so to put it into more concrete terms, if the state says that you have to give 60-day notice for rent increase to tenants, and the city of Issaquah were to say, no, you have to give 120-day, does that mean that state law preempts us, or does that mean that because the state hasn't taken the whole field, for that kind of law, that we could indeed go forward with a stricter law? I guess that's my question. How would it apply in practical terms to our discussion? Thanks.
So you're correct. There's a statute in the Residential Landlord Tenant Act that requires 60 days written notice. And so the argument that we will see is exactly that we are preempted because there is a conflict with that statute. I would argue, and I think that this argument would prevail, that the ordinance, it would not be irreconcilably in conflict with that statute, because the statute specifically sets a minimum of 60 days notice. It doesn't really doesn't forbid a city from having a longer period of notice. That's really it's a minimum. I think if the city were to try to shorten the amount of notice that you were to provide, that would be a problem. That would be a conflict, but I don't think lengthening the amount of notice would be in conflict with the statute. And I based that analysis on several Landlord Tenant Act cases regarding preemption. They're not about that particular statute, but they're about other similar portions of the Landlord Tenant Act that kind of set minimums, and then cities came in and enacted sort of stricter regulations, and the court said no, that's not in conflict because it wasn't strictly forbidden. But because it says 60 days, that's why I think you would likely see a preemption argument. I think it would fail based on the case law, but you would probably get somebody to make that argument, because you kind of have if somebody, an attorney didn't really know a whole lot. I mean, it kind of looks like a conflict, even though it doesn't meet the test of irreconcilable conflict under, the preemption case law.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll follow that with a question about, I see here that unincorporated King County has had 120 days notice for rent increases larger than 3% for a year, and Auburn has had 120 days notice for rent increases larger than 5% for 2 years. Are we aware of legal challenges to either King County or Auburn?
Nope, I looked and I couldn't find anything that at least has made it to the Court of Appeals yet. And Seattle also has a law, and we know that Seattle gets challenged on the regular for these things. And I did see some news article about folks squawking that they were going to sue over Seattle.
This is why I didn't ask about Seattle. Okay, so
I haven't seen, I do know multiple jurisdictions have had laws like this for some time, and no one has been successfully challenged.
All right, thank you. I'll let you get back to your presentation.
Well, that was really, that was kind of the substance of it, is that I don't think you have a preemption issue because, or at least while I think you might see a challenge, because at this point I just don't trust that folks won't challenge anything they could possibly challenge. I've just seen everything, but I don't think it would prevail. So I don't think that's really a source of potential liability. It's just a source of a potential lawsuit, I guess is how I would put it. You might end up having to defend it, but I don't think that it would. I think it's completely defensible.
Councilmember. I'm sorry.
The last potential source of litigation then would be something related to enforcement, and that of course is a lot easier to control, because then you just behave yourself. You don't selectively enforce, right, and you hopefully then don't put yourself in a bad situation. It doesn't mean that someone won't once again make an argument that you did. It happens. We get those types of cases, not uncommonly in the municipal legal field, but we just we do our best to be fair and impartial and enforce fairly and impartially. And, that those cases should be few and far between. But that said, I do think enforcement of these would be difficult. Not only because...
Hold on, before you get into this enforcement, Councilmember Ray has a question.
No, it's probably spot on. My question I was going to ask, and I think this is exactly where you're going, Rachel. What does the enforcement process and what do the enforcement tools look like, and what's involved in if we were to do this enforcing it?
Well, I would think that you'd probably, I would assume it'd probably be a code enforcement thing, because that's who enforces every other violation of the code, other than criminal violations, which go to the police. So, we have I think one code enforcement officer. I'm assuming then depending on the number of these, I don't know. I'm assuming there wouldn't be a whole lot of them, so I presume we wouldn't have to hire staff, but it would definitely add to the code enforcement officer's workload. But more than that, what I'm worried about is putting the code enforcement officer in a position of having to decide who is telling the truth in these situations, and having to kind of investigate, because I'm not sure it would always be clear that, a tenant says, I didn't receive notice, I wasn't given notice. A landlord says, well, I gave them notice. Here's the notice. The tenant says, no, they didn't give me that notice. I mean, who do you believe? I mean, that I can foresee things like that really happening. And is the city staff supposed to essentially be the judge in those matters? I think that puts staff in a really, really uncomfortable position. And also, that could then in itself could lead you into that path of potential enforcement related legal disputes. Because
how so?
I'm not sure it would always be, because let's say that the code enforcement officer doesn't think that there's enough proof. Let's say that they don't believe the tenant, that the landlord produces a letter and they say, no, we gave this to them, but they forged it, and so they don't enforce it. And the tenant says, well, you just believe them because they are white and I'm not. I mean, then you get into this, was it a discriminatory action? Was, something like that? That's a fact pattern that I can foresee happening.
Councilmember Ray, no further questions? All right. Rachel, do you have any other material to present this evening?
No, that was it. I'm just here to answer any questions you have.
I will ask if we're aware of how Auburn and/or unincorporated King County enforces their policies.
Well, my guess is that King County doesn't do much enforcement. If it's like many of their other codes, quite frankly, they probably don't do much. I'm not aware of how Auburn does it. That's a good question. I can find out.
Well, depending on how the conversation goes today, it might be useful to find that out. All right. Councilmember Ray?
So, the enforcement thing is really interesting. But, so I'm a tenant, and I don't get notice and my rent increases. So my recourse then is I go to the city and say, hey, city, they violated my, this ordinance, and you need to tell them to knock it off, and they can't raise my rent. Or will the tenant take some sort of a legal action, or what's the process look like, kind of at a very nuts and boltsy level, when I feel like as a renter I'm not getting my due?
The process is essentially that they come to the city and that the city then can fine them for not complying with its code.
Can the city compel them to not raise the rent?
Let me take a look at the proposed ordinance here. I don't believe so. I think really all we'd have the
If helpful, while Rachel is looking for information, I can tell you what we do currently in human services when we get residents and we get calls. So depending on what the complaint is, let's say if a tenant complains about unsafe conditions, then we refer them to code enforcement. If they complain to anything related to rent increase, first we refer them to rental assistance, and we also refer them to legal services. So that's the free or low cost legal services. So that's our current process for that.
So I just looked, and the ordinance does provide that any action taken in violation of the ordinance would be null and void. So then, then I think that they would make the argument that the rent increase was null and void. We, however, wouldn't really be able to enforce that. We don't have, our courts don't have jurisdiction over their breach of contract cases. That would be something that then they would have to duke out in Superior Court. Or perhaps small claims court.
Well, thank you. Other questions? All right. Do we have any members of the public on the call that might wish to speak to this issue?
Chair Martz, I see no virtual hands raised to speak on this topic.
All right. Well, we only have council members and staff in the room, so we can move straight to a discussion of the item in front of us. So the administration is recommending that we wait and get more sort of regional direction. I'm going to, Councilmember DiMichele.
Yeah, I'll go first. Would you like to finish what you were saying, however? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So I think as I expressed at our first meeting, I am very interested in the first suggestion from Arch regarding additional time for notification, just because of the market situation for housing here. And just to be sure that we're talking about the right thing, we're not talking about evictions. We're not talking about people who haven't paid their rent. What we're talking about is rent notifications to people who have been good tenants and who may not, because of their family budget, be able to accommodate the rent increase. And so they're going to have to move. So these are responsible people who have to make tough decisions for their family. If they've got kids in school, it becomes even more hard, especially if it's during the school year rather than at the end of the school year. And so I noticed that Auburn and other jurisdictions have already passed the 120-day notice. The other two items that Arch is proposing, and I've had several conversations with people who are landlords, people who are tenants, and there's just a feeling that those proposals just do not do very much. And in fact, the cap on the late fees, for example, one landlord put it to me, that's just an incentive for me to raise the rents higher. And so I just don't think that, I appreciate Arch putting these forward because it's really a difficult situation right now, but I don't see that the second and third proposals do much to protect tenants, and in fact could have a boomerang effect in terms of actually incentivizing landlords to raise their rents. So, but the first proposal I do have an interest in. I guess I would say that if you're a landlord and you want to make absolutely sure that that your notifications has been sent, you would document it with either a certificated letter or a photograph of you handing the notice to the tenant. Or, I mean, there are ways with technology that you can document that pretty clearly, that you handed that notification to someone. So I don't see that that's an actual problem. And I'm sure that there would be cases where tenants don't know their rights and may not report, and so then we wouldn't be able to enforce. But I think generally we should put something like that in place. However, I have to say, I also honor our human services people, and if they're saying to us, let's wait and see, perhaps it would be a good course of action to wait and see a little bit longer and see what other jurisdictions do. So I guess the summary of my remarks is I am very interested in doing the first proposal. I think the other two proposals I'm not interested in supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Ray?
Thanks. I'm having kind of a little bit of a change of heart on this issue, and that I'm kind of thinking maybe it's time to lead. Maybe it's time to say this is the right thing to do, and so instead of waiting for everybody to get on board and come along and we'll follow, maybe it's time for us to say it's time to lead. And I really appreciate the comparison chart. Thank you for putting that together. And state law is 60 days, and so we're not talking about going from 5 days notice to 120 days notice. We're talking about going from 60 to 120, which is not a really significant change. And I kind of like the middle ground, which is Auburn, which is 120 days for an increase over 5%. So I could actually get behind, saying, look, we're gonna take a step. I get the issues around enforcement; they concern me, but we have those today, and so I don't think that this is any different than tomorrow than it would be today. And then the sad thing is, to Councilmember DiMichele's point, the problem is people don't know that they have these rights anyway, and so they're at a significant disadvantage. So if we do this, I think there's also some outreach we want to do to make sure people know that this, you got rights around this. So I hadn't thought about the late fees or the move-in fees having a boomerang effect, but I think that's interesting. So I could see how that could be. So, but I think we could do something about notice. I don't think that would be overly detrimental, and it gives us a chance to say, look, we're leaders in this East Side community.
Thank you. So the question that I would have, because my feelings are similar to both of yours. I just wonder that 5% or 3%. I mean, if King County is 3%, and if one of the things we heard from landlords is they like a consistent environment, maybe you do the 3% because that's, we adjoin Fall City and Preston and unincorporated King County and the Renton Highlands. So, I mean, I would be inclined to go with the 3% one. Just to be consistent with unincorporated King County. I think landlords are just going to do this. Like, I think it's good to think about what happens if, there's like a Mission Impossible forging of documents. I just think landlords will understand that that's the policy here, and it's because things have gotten so expensive that it's so challenging for people to find alternative housing if they're going to need to do that. So, would you be supportive of the 3%?
Yeah. Now it's interesting. Having just a discussion and not waiting to be called on at all. The King County is 90 or 120 days notice for all rent increases. So just
where are you seeing that?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm looking over here at other alternatives.
Yeah, no, King County's 120.
Yeah, 120. Yeah, I that's fine. I don't have a problem.
Okay. All right. So I guess what we are proposing is to specifically request the administration prepare for consideration by the full council that element of the earlier conversation that regarded a 120-day notice for rent increases greater than 3%.
And if I might add on to that, And it's not just that, it's and to do the other things, which is to evaluate what's happening in the region and
Yes.
consider putting it in our 2023, 2024 legislative agenda.
I agree.
So before we
That's a long
make a
motion.
decision on that, does the administration have any feedback they want us to consider? City Administrator?
Thank you, Chair Martz. Certainly, we echo, I think, the committee's feelings that it's important to be a leader. It's a relatively small adjustment. Again, my concern will be enforcement, that what happens when the tenant calls and says, I have this notice, they're wanting to raise it in 30 days, and the city has this ordinance in effect, and I believe the city attorney's still on the line. Rachel, I don't know if you can comment on your thoughts on the enforcement piece, that this would certainly be something that your office would likely have to take the lead on in contacting the landlord on behalf of the tenant. Is that a fair assumption?
My office or code enforcement, or my office really in conjunction with code enforcement. I mean, we work with them on everything they do anyway, so even if it is them, it's us. So yes, it would, it'll definitely involve us.
So, and then to remind the council committee, we have one code enforcement staff member. So this individual already has a fair amount on her plate, and so this would be an additional thing. I'm not sharing this to discourage the committee, but I think just a practical application of this is additional work for the staff to deal with.
Thank you, City Administrator. Councilmember DeMichelle?
Monica, do we still have an arrangement with ELAP, or did that expire? Have we used up all the money for that program?
We have with both ELAP and King County Bar Association. We currently fund them with the Human Services grants. And similar to this, may or may not be related, we also support mediation services, which again may or may not be considered here.
Thank you.
All right, so are we ready to recommend, move forward for full council consideration of 120-day notice of rent increases greater than 3% and continue to monitor actions taken by their jurisdictions per the language in the administration's recommendation? All in favor say aye.
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 Oh.
I think there was one more part. Put it in the.
Oh, put your mic on.
Sorry. I think there was one more. Put it in our.
I'm sorry, I didn't finish the rest of the language, I'm sorry. Yeah, advocate at regional and state levels, including potentially adding this item to the city's 2022-2023 state legislative agenda. Sorry, I kind of just did the ellipsis on that one. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously.
Regular business?
Yes. Yes. Because there'll be more, I'm sure, more that we'll hear from Rachel on this subject and the administration. Does the administration have anything else this evening? I have a piece of housekeeping. I am not going to be at the August 1st, wait, am I, not going to be at the August 1st City Council meeting. Wait a second. Why did I think I wasn't going to be? Now I don't know why I thought I wasn't going to be at the. Never mind. No, never mind. I thought for some reason I thought I wasn't going to be at that meeting, but now I don't know why I thought that. So never mind. We are adjourned.
What's our next meeting?
Sorry. Is our next meeting in September? Next meeting is in September. I can very quickly come up with that date through the magic of modern technology. That would be
The 20th.
Thank you, clerk. That would be Tuesday, September 20th, 6:30 here in Chambers.
Okay.
Thank you at home, and we are adjourned.